welcome. My name is Janelle Rice, I'm pastor at Calvary Moravian Church in Allentown, and thank you for joining us for the first of our 4-week series of Advent MidWeek devotionals entitled God with Us, using the Illustrated Devotional from Illustrated Ministries. Through this time, we'll look at those words of Emmanuel, the name that is often given to Jesus, meaning God with us, and asked in this theme and this season of Advent how God provides hope, peace, joy, and love to each of us. We begin tonight with a family story. But before that, let's ask the question of what is your family story? We each have a family story. Sometimes they're stories of hope. Sometimes they're stories of suffering or difficult times. Probably they're stories of a little bit of each. Ask yourself your family stories. Who are your ancestors? Where did they make their homes? What stories did they pass on to you? And how did they show love? What did they celebrate? Each story is different, but each story has something that can provide a meaning for us today. It's interesting because in the very beginning of the New Testament, in the very first gospel of our New Testament, is Matthew, and it begins with a family story, a genealogy. Matthew 1, verses 1 to 17 begins with an account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And so we hear, Abraham was the father of Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Aram. And you're already beginning to see why we often don't read this during church. There's a lot of names, and a lot that aren't so familiar to us. If we lead on, we hear about Boaz, though, the father of Obed, by Ruth. You might have heard of her. And Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. There he is. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah, and Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph, and so forth and so forth. Oh, there's a lot of names. We continue on in seeing all of these names until the time of deportation to Babylon. And then we're told that there are 14 generations after the deportation to Babylon, after the Israelites come back from their time of exile away from Jerusalem and their promised land. And then we have 14 more generations until finally we get to Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah. Why would we begin with a family tree? Why would we begin by telling family stories and by mentioning these names? Is there anything significant for us in hearing these names, and any names that are a little strange to be included? Maybe we didn't hear them all at once because there are so many names, but there are the names of 4 women mentioned. A little bit unusual, if we think about it, to have women mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus in a time when women wouldn't have been mentioned often in genealogies or really considered on the same plane as men. 4 women in particular, Tamar, wouldn't stand out to be mentioned in a genealogy. She was the daughter-in-law of Judah, but her treatment into her family was so unjust that she resorted to tricking them in order to survive. There's Rahab. She was cast out by her own people. There's Bathsheba. You might have heard of Bathsheba, but here she's only referred to as the wife of Uriah. It was Uriah who King David threatened and saw, and after wanting to marry Bathsheba and to take her for his wife, he cast Uriah out into the military and ended up taking Bathsheba to be his wife. And finally, there's Ruth. We probably know of Ruth, who was not an Israelite. She's a Moabite, a foreigner, here in the genealogy of Jesus. What does that have to say? A foreigner would be among Jesus's people. It is Ruth who left her home when it became a place of grief and famine and learned and wanted to be with a whole new people. Those are the named people. There's also others that are mentioned within the genealogy of Jesus. And if we turn to a text by Raymond Brown, The Coming Christ in Advent, we hear a little bit about some of the other characters that are mentioned. Not only King David, but some of the less than desirable kings is mentioned by Raymond Brown. His main point in how important this genealogy is found in what he has to say a little bit later. He says, if we realize that human beings have been empowered to preserve, proclaim, and convey the salvation brought by Jesus Christ through ongoing history, the genealogy of the sequence of Jesus contains a peculiar assortment of people. The God who wrote the beginnings with cricket lines also writes the sequence with cricket lines. And some of those lines are our own lives in witness. What does this mean? This means that all that is within this genealogy, all of these names are names of both saints and sinners. If we do the research on who these folks were, we'll see that some of them are desirable to be within this genealogy of Jesus, and some are a little bit less than desirable. And yet God wouldn't just use the saints, the ones who are elevated, but God would choose to use some of the maybe less than desirable, the ones who used trickery like Jacob. Even King David is known for being both a great king and also taking Bathsheba, doing things that were not just. We see that God uses crooked ways that are not the normal. He uses those who are less than perfect to bring about the Messiah, Jesus the Christ. So these stories are important. They're important because they provide hope in who is named in this genealogy. They invite more stories. And they remind us that we are all invited. Saints and sinners, those who have stories of hope in our past, those who have stories of suffering. We are all invited into this great family of Jesus that welcomes in the foreigners like Ruth, those who are a little less than perfect, and everyone in between. The Gospel of Matthew opens with this listing of generations because we are invited too. We are the children of God. We can be ancestors in faith. So just a couple questions as we end our devotional time together. Questions to think about, to go a little deeper. First of all, what's a story that you like to tell about your family? Is there a story that you have about your family that provides hope? Or maybe on a different note, what's a story that's been passed down that shares a story of difficulty or survival? And finally, thinking about Jesus' genealogy, and maybe you want to turn to it and read it again from the Gospel of Matthew. When you hear that, what story do you feel it's inviting you to tell? How does the story of Jesus' genealogy provide a moment of hope? So this first week of Advent, we think about hope. We think about where we need to look into our own family stories and where Jesus' family story can provide us with hope. God bless you, and we'll hope you tune in next Wednesday.